Welcome to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in San Diego County today, and we are joined by Todd Gloria. He is a new member of the California State Assembly, spent 8 years on the San Diego City Council. You go from 9 to 80, maybe 120 if you include the Senate. How is it? A new job and lots of new people.
It's, yeah, that's exactly right.
Right.
It's a new gig, very, very different. I'm about 6-7 weeks in, and I'm just trying to adjust to all of it. Yeah, a lot more colleagues, a lot more interesting people, bigger issues. So I got my plate is full, but I'm loving it.
What I find most interesting, and I've spoken with other folks who've gone from boards of supervisors to Sacramento or city council to Sacramento, you have to deal with what's known as the Brown Act, where you can't talk to a majority of the body. And when you have 9 people on your city council, it's hard to negotiate because you can't talk to many of them. But in Sacramento, you're good. I mean, you can talk and caucus and strategize.
Well, Pat, it's funny you know that. You know your stuff.
I try.
And that's exactly right. And everyone believes in open government. We want to be open and transparent. But I think when you're dealing with issues as complex as elected officials have to deal with today, that ability to have a free and open dialogue with one another without concern about sort of tripping over one another.
Right.
And we can do that in Sacramento. I think we still operate in a transparent way. Votes are still taken in public. We're still held accountable. But that ability to go to a colleague on perhaps the other side of the aisle and have an honest conversation about some of the big issues that are facing California, that's actually a great freedom that I appreciate having now.
And let's talk about that other side of the aisle, because technically speaking, when you were on the city council in San Diego, you're all nonpartisans. I mean, you knew what the other party was, but now you're in caucuses, the Democratic caucus, the Republican caucus. You're in the Democratic caucus. Now, my perception, sir, is that y'all get along pretty well in Sacramento. It's not like Washington. Dems and Reaps do pretty well. But it's different. So talk me through it.
Yeah, I mean, on the city council, I always talk about there's no Republican potholes or Democratic stop signs.
Exactly, right.
And what I'm finding up there is that's not dissimilar up there. The vast majority of things are unanimous or near unanimous. I mean, there's a lot of consensus, but there are some partisan fault lines. We have been dealing with California's reaction to the new president, looking at issues like immigration, women's health care, and these tend to be more bright lines in terms of partisanship. But other than that, we're still, at the end of the day, trying to run what is the 6th largest economy in the world. And there's a lot of consensus around doing that.
And let's talk about the new administration, because California, at least its leadership, has no doubt taken an aggressive position vis-a-vis the Trump administration. The hiring of Eric Holder as kind of Attorney General light. I mean, you have a new Attorney General with Javier Becerra, which was seen as a pretty strong position. What do you think about this? I mean, one could argue that the aggressive posture was maybe too much and didn't even give the administration a chance to think.
I've heard people say that. I think my reaction is that it would be malpractice for us not to be prepared for an administration that clearly is articulating policies that are at odds with what we have as California state law. And so in the case of the Affordable Care Act, if the president follows through on his intention to repeal that, that would be a $17 billion cost to the state of California and would throw 5 million Californians off of their health insurance. Those are big things, and I think Californians would be very disappointed if legislators like myself did not take the steps to retain expert help in negotiating with folks in Washington, D.C., get an attorney general that has some experience back in Washington and is a proven fighter for Californians. So we are trying to do what we need to do to protect the interests of Californians. I'm sad that that really puts us largely at odds with the new president, but when you look at some of his rhetoric, they are, again, at odds with California's values, and my constituents, I think, would be disappointed if we weren't fighting every day for them.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Affordable Care Act, because there's no doubt that, look, events are moving quickly, but this administration is not a fan of what's known as Obamacare. Now, the Affordable Care Act has been pretty successful, arguably. I mean, Covered California has a huge number of people who've signed up. The Medicaid expansion has been very successful, but part of that success is as a result of federal subsidies.
Correct.
I mean, 90% of the folks that are newly insured get a federal subsidy. If those subsidies go away, what do we do in California?
Well, we're waiting to see. It's a wait-and-see approach. We understand the rhetoric that's coming out of D.C. We know that that rhetoric doesn't always match up with actual actions, and so we're kind of uncertain with what the future may hold. We are taking those preventative steps of getting the professional help, but you're exactly right. The California did two things. One is that we have the assistance of the federal government, but we also engaged. You saw many states that would not engage in this process,
Right.
and I think that's why Covered California is so successful. That's why 1 in 3 Californians now receive their health care through Medicaid, why 5 million people get their health care through Covered California, and why we have the uninsured rates at some of the lowest ever in our state's history. About 7% of Californians now are uninsured, a huge reduction from where it was just a few years ago. If that is done away with, the legislature is going to have its hands full to try and figure out how do we replace that in a way that we can afford. But I think that certainly myself, I understand that it's a penny-wise, pound-foolish approach to have folks not be insured because we know that they still get health care. They end up in our emergency rooms, and ultimately the taxpayers often pay that bill as well, or at least all of us do, right? So we have to figure this out, but I think I remain hopeful that as some of these legislators back in Washington, D.C., folks for whom have been historically antagonistic to the Affordable Care Act realize that it's their constituents that are on this program. Maybe they'll think twice. And I associate myself with what former President Obama would say. If you can improve upon it,
Right.
we'll embrace it. I think California would absolutely do that, but we don't hear any solutions coming out of the folks who want to repeal it.
Another challenge that California faces, and specifically San Diego, is the rhetoric surrounding Mexico and undocumented immigrants. I mean, those are two disparate elements, but when I think about Mexico, which is literally just miles away, the amount of trade that occurs between Mexico and the United States is quite significant. I mean, $300 billion one way and maybe $250 the other way. And I have to think San Diego plays a very significant role in that. What can California do about the rhetoric and a potential trade war with Mexico?
Well, there's the human component and there's the economic component.
Right.
The economic component is exactly what you're talking about. Just a few years ago, our inefficient border, the 2-hour plus wait times that we see, we were able to quantify as costing San Diego roughly $7 billion. That's what it just comes from not being able to get across the border in an efficient manner. Now that the new administration really seems at making it intent on making it even more difficult to cross, I'm deeply concerned about what that will do to San Diego's economy, to California's economy, for job creation, and for a loss of economic impacts. Then you transfer over to the human side, and that's really talking about breaking up families, about detaining people without due process, and sending folks back to countries that they may not have any real relationship with. I'm thinking about the so-called dreamers, people who came here with their parents, maybe not even aware of their undocumented status. These are folks who are now apparently open season on.
And what's challenging for the dreamers is that when President Obama launched the DACA program, he said, look, give us your information. We promise we won't use it to deport. That's not a legally enforceable promise. And so if the new president wants to deport dreamers, he's got their information.
He does have their information, and this is what California's response to that human element of this is. What we have said is that we will not be complicit in breaking up families. There is legislation before the Senate and the Assembly that would make the state not expend any taxpayer resources in enforcing immigration laws.
Yet the new president has said very clearly, if you don't play on immigration, we're going to withhold federal funds. And he arguably could do that.
Well, I don't think we can put California's values up for sale. And while the president may want to extort communities, I think history will judge communities that sell out their residents very harshly. We have seen this in our history. We have seen immigration policy tailored to exploit and harm certain communities, and those are the chapters of our history books that are most shameful. And I think that this president seems to be intent on adding another one of those chapters, but I think history judges those who stand up against that very well, and I think history will record California as standing up against this wrong-headed approach that hurts people and the economy.
He's Todd Gloria, a member of the California State Assembly. I'm Brad Pomerance in San Diego. It's Local Edition.